Hello, my name's Martin Field. Welcome to this third session of the 4 Million Homes programme. The 4 Million Homes programme, funded by the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, has been designed to be a catalyst for change in the social housing sector, providing free knowledge, guidance and training on residents' rights and on how residents can stand up for them. This session will focus on what are known as residents' panels. Now, by this phrase, resident panels, we're using a term that covers a variety of arrangements to promote an accountability of the social housing operations back to its local residents. Across the social housing sector, residents are involved in a variety of decision-making processes, monitoring and scrutiny procedures, dealing with complaints, service reviews, policy considerations, and assessing whether other functions relating to are undertaken by the landlord meet performance. The term resident panel is therefore used here as a general summary description of various local arrangements that all want to bring about an accountability of the landlord's services and performance back to its local residents. The term actually could also be applied to different neighbourhood-based groups set up by residents and communities such as residents' associations. But why are we talking about this? Why are residents' panels important? Over many years, residents' panels have progressively become an integral part of how landlords engage with their residents and help shape their business. Where resident panels are set up well, they're a clear business asset to their landlord, making considerable contributions to ensure that local services are what the residents actually want and playing a role in supporting effective governance and decision-making, especially in areas such as getting good value for money. So they act as an important component in assessing the landlord's performance, providing constructive challenge to the accepted way that things may have been done in order to improve them, helping to sort out resident problems and issues locally and speedily acting as service users, ambassadors for the landlord. So this session will look at a number of things. Central government policy to support the engagement of social housing residents with their landlords, the policy and regulatory context behind all this and other resident satisfaction measures, the role of residents' panels and some key options of what those panels could do, common principles behind the membership and function of residents' panels, what support such panels could or even should receive from their landlords, and finally, how to start assessing whether the work of residents' panels is leading to local service improvement. So part one, policy and regulation. There have been many government initiatives from the 1980s onwards designed to empower social housing residents. These initiatives have included the introduction in 1985 of the right to be consulted, housing co-ops, estate management boards, the right to manage, tenant management organisations, compulsory competitive tendering monitoring panels, tenant compacts, and other resident groups of various shapes and sizes, including numerous tenants and residents associations and other tenant federations. Other resident involvement in stock transfer housing associations and resident-owned housing associations, co-regulation with the encouragement of the regulator of social housing's increasing focus on tenant empowerment and involvement. And all of these approaches have played a role in providing greater opportunities for residents to be involved in local and national housing issues. So there have been many different approaches, and all have played a role in providing greater opportunities for residents to be involved in local and national housing issues. And in the most recent years, the Social Housing White Paper in 2020 called a Charter for Social Housing Residents, set out the actions the government of the day was to take to ensure that residents in social housing are safe, that they're listened to, that they're able to live in good quality homes, and that they have access to appropriate means of responding and challenging things that might go wrong. The government's intentions for the social housing were clearly spelt out, seeking to ensure that homes are safe, by reinforcing the regulator of social housing's consumer regulation objective for making landlords comply with health and safety requirements, to increase transparency and empower residents by allowing them greater visibility of how well their landlord is performing and implementing a set of tenant satisfaction measures that the social landlords should report against, to ensure swift and effective resolution of complaints by building on changes to improve the Housing Ombudsman Service, to transform social housing regulation, to proactively regulate on consumer standards, including the quality of homes and repairs and meaningful engagement with residents and how their complaints are handled, to encourage investment in neighbourhoods, places and homes by reviewing the Decent Home Standard and by enabling residents to know who's responsible for action and who can support a system. In support of these points, there's certainly a recognition by government and parliament that some social landlords engage well with their residents and listen to them. However, it's also acknowledged as being inconsistent across the sector. Recent consultations record clear examples of residents feeling patronised, ignored, or treated with disrespect. Indeed, the post-Grenville independent review of building regulations and fire safety in particular noted the voices of residents often go unheard, even when safety issues are identified. This has been furthermore reinforced by other recent examples of where consistent complaints about poor property maintenance and about homes being hazardous to health, no longer fit for habitation, have been consistently disregarded and then later officially recognised as contributing to the subsequent death and sickness that households have experienced. So government policy clearly identifies a democratic deficit in social housing in terms of how residents in social housing settings are often not able to challenge their landlord's performance. And it wants to create an environment where those residents' voices are heard and where landlords respond proactively to what their residents want. As noted in previous sessions of the 4 Million Homes programme, the government directs the regulator of social housing to issue regulatory standards that set out what is expected from social housing landlords. The regulator's national consumer standards are focused upon ensuring the provision of social housing that is well managed and of the appropriate quality, and ensuring that households in social housing have the opportunity also to be involved in its management and hold their landlords to account, encouraging landlords to contribute to the environmental, social and economic well-being of the areas in which their housing is situated. One of these standards, the Tenant Involvement and Empowerment Standard, sets out particular requirements and expectations that relate to involving and empowering residents, and this will be returned to later. Specific changes within the social housing sector are now due to come into effect from the recent Social Housing Regulation Act 2023. This became law in July 2023. It has enhanced the regulator's power to carry out regular inspections of the largest social housing providers, with gearing up to do this on a rolling 4-year basis from April 2024. It will issue unlimited fines to rogue social landlords for any poor performance and sets strict time limits within which social landlords will need to address identified hazards such as damp and mould. The new Act has also given powers to the Housing Ombudsman to publish best practice guidance to landlords following investigations into tenant complaints, and set demands for mandatory qualification requirements for social housing managers. Further consultation will be taking place during 2023 on other proposed government changes and improvements to the regulator's overall consumer standards. Further recent requirements on social landlords are the new tenant satisfaction measures. From the 1st of April 2023, there are requirements for all landlords to start collecting data on tenant satisfaction measures, TSMs. These standards require all registered landlords to report on TSMs that will be specified by the regulator. The document, Tenant Satisfaction Measures Tenant Survey Requirements, sets out the basis upon which providers are required to conduct surveys of the residents to be recorded as tenant perceptions, and should be read in conjunction with the earlier document, Tenant Satisfaction Measures Technical Requirements. Now note here the term tenant is government shorthand used to include tenants, leaseholders and other users of a landlord services under one term. This means landlords must collect and provide the kind of information that can support effective scrutiny by all residents of their landlord's performance in managing their homes and neighbourhoods, and thereby enable that scrutiny to be as effective as possible. The scope of the tenant satisfaction measures and of future surveys will focus on residents' levels of satisfaction regarding their landlord's performance on a range of things: undertaking repairs, ongoing property maintenance, the safety of residents' homes, treating residents with fairness and respect, dealing with complaints, the upkeep of communal areas, making positive contributions to local neighbourhoods, and dealing with antisocial behaviour. So again, separate to the new tenant satisfaction measures, mention has already been made of the regulator's tenant involvement and empowerment standard. This requires landlords to take account of the diverse needs of their residents, treating all of them with fairness and respect, and demonstrating that the different needs of all their residents have been properly understood. The regulator is clear the purpose of this standard is to set out how a landlord should interact and engage with its residents. And it sees the requirements of this standard speak to the culture of the organisation and how its systems and processes operate in practice. The Tenant Involvement and Empowerment Standard therefore sets out a number of required outcomes and then specific expectations that relate to how landlords involve and empower their residents. So as required outcomes, landlords need to ensure their residents are given a wide range of opportunities for them to influence and be involved in, for example, the formulation of their landlord's housing-related policies and strategic priorities, the making of decisions about how housing-related services are delivered, including the setting of local standards, the scrutiny of the landlord's performance, and the making of recommendations to the landlord about how that performance might be improved, the direct management of their homes, where this may be applicable, the management of repair and maintenance services, such as commissioning and undertaking a range of repair tasks as agreed with landlords, and finally, agreeing local offers for service delivery. Under specific expectations, landlords are required to implement opportunities for a broad involvement and empowerment of their residents, for example, by supporting residents to exercise their right to manage or otherwise take on housing management functions where appropriate, supporting the formation and activities of resident panels or equivalent groups, and responding in a constructive and timely manner to them. The provision of timely and relevant performance information to support effective scrutiny by residents of the landlord's performance, and in a form agreed between the landlord and its residents. Such provision must include the publication of an annual report, which includes information on repair and maintenance budgets. Providing support to residents to build their capacity to be more effectively involved, consulting with residents on the scope of local offers for service delivery, including how performance will be monitored, reported on and scrutinised by the residents, and what arrangements will be made to review these on a periodic basis. Where existing landlords are proposing a change in who may be the landlord in the future for one or more of their residents, or a significant change in their management arrangements, they should consult with the affected residents in a fair, timely, appropriate and effective manner. The proposals should be set out clearly and in an appropriate amount of detail, and should set out any actual or potential advantages and disadvantages, including costs, to residents in the immediate and longer term. Landlords must be able to demonstrate to affected residents how they've taken account of their needs in consultation when reaching a decision. The standard also requires landlords to consult the residents at least once every 3 years on the best way of involving them in the governance and scrutiny of the organisation's services. So part 2 of the session roles and activities for residence panels. The role of residence panels. A detailed approach to the potential role and work of residence panels is contained in the publication Tenants Panels Options for Accountability. This guidance was produced a while ago from a collaborative work undertaken by national organisations supporting tenants and residents across the social housing sector. But it still offers a wealth of experience for looking at common principles behind residence panels, options for what panels are engaged with, resources needed to be effective, and overcoming challenges like if landlords are not supportive of local panels. The common principles that lie behind how panels should be established and how they should function include co-regulation. Now, co-regulation is about residents and landlords working in partnership to self-regulate their local service delivery, as well as enabling residents to ensure that landlords are delivering what's expected of them by the regulatory standards. Co-regulation can mean residents and landlords work with each other to shape the landlord's own decision-making and services. Resident leadership. The resident panels can only be as effective as the residents who get involved with them. Different residents will perform different functions within resident panel arrangements, but all those who do get involved are really the resident leadership, and they need to have or develop skills and attitudes that can properly enable them to be effective resident leaders. Panels therefore need to be based upon creating the development of a mature understanding of the resident leadership role, purpose and responsibilities, and recognising their accountability to the wider residents' body. Support for residents' panels to think independently, reaching their own conclusions, challenging colleagues where it's appropriate to do so. The identification of the skills and qualities the panel members need to have to be effective residents leaders, along with procedures that will help such skills develop, and the enthusiasm to learn and engage with residents and landlords from elsewhere in order to gain even wider knowledge. Access and fairness to all. Resident panels need to be equal, diverse and inclusive, meaning they should be accessible to all the residents and operate in accordance with accepted standards of fairness and conduct. So panels should seek to understand and reflect the views of all the diverse groups of residents and other service users. It's too often been the case, traditional structure and forms of approaches to resident participation have favoured some types of residents, but actually created barriers to the involvement by others. So the panels need to be open to all residents to apply to become a member of them and be governed by codes of conduct agreed with the residents that are complied with and where steps are taken if that code is actually breached. Effective processes and adequate support for panels. Resident panels can only be effective if they're supported by clear and effective processes where they are adequately resourced to carry out their functions. So this actually requires having clearly defined and agreed processes to support their functions, and that transmit learning and good practice throughout the landlord structure and personnel. There be clarity about the objectives of the work of a panel, so that it can ensure sufficient resources are available to support its work, and periodically assessing the impact of the work of a panel to ensure it's delivering the intended outcomes. Focusing on outcomes being achieved for residents, ultimately residents' panels must be about achieving positive outcomes for local residents. Qualitative examples of such outcomes could include residents receiving better quality information, disabled people finding services easy to access, antisocial behaviour cases being responded more effectively, residents feeling more confident to review key policies. Quantitative examples could include the numbers of first-time repairs being increased, more residents feeling their views are being taken into account, the average time to let a home being decreased, the average cost per repair being decreased, and so more resources becoming available to meet other needs. There are certainly different options for the roles and functions resident panels might fulfil. So we'll go through this in a little more detail now. In terms of decision making, effective residents panels undertaking decision making usually need to be about working in partnership with the landlord, have a means of being accountable back to the wider resident constituency, have routes by which they can influence decision making and services, and be focused upon practical issues that really matter to local residents. Now, the wide array of resident panels involved in decision making does, however, make them a bit difficult to define. So the next brief descriptions just try and give some impression of the range this might cover. So co-governance. Some resident panels involved in decision making have a specific involvement in governance. In some cases, this is set out within a landlord's formal rules. They could be described as co-governance panels, working alongside the boards of the housing associations or residence providers, or arm's length organisations, or a local authority's cabinet or committee structure. Joint management panels. Other panels involve residents as part of a body that also includes other members such as senior staff or local authority portfolio holders for councillors or other local councillors. Resident management and control panels. Resident-controlled housing associations, for example cooperatives, tenant management organisations, are examples of residents' panels which manage services and may even own their own homes. Advisory panels. Whilst not formally part of a governance structure, some panels have been set up to perform such functions with direct relationships with boards and senior staff. Residents' federations. Residents' federations are a long-standing means by which local residents have been represented. Usually independent of the landlord, they have had various relationships with landlords and operate in a variety of different ways. Area and specific panels. Larger landlords often have area-based resident panels operating and focus on local places. Some housing associations formed as a result of mergers have residents panels set up in different parts of its group structures. Some panels have been set up to consider particular service areas, such as communications or major repairs, or resident involvements, and many other matters. Some panels have been set up to represent particular demographic groups in relation to a landlord's wider body of residents. Shaping services. Many landlords have panels that have been set up to enable residents to be involved in reviewing particular services. These may be permanent or temporary task and finish groups. And effective systems to review services can include a systematic plan to review frontline services, so residents are clear when particular elements of the service will be reviewed. Leadership of a review by a team including residents, staff and possibly members from the landlord's governing body. Gathering evidence that feeds into the review, such as survey data, evidence of satisfaction, focus groups, the use of resident sounding boards, resident inspection and mystery shopping reports. Performance data. Benchmark information and information on best practice used elsewhere, collating this evidence in a resident-friendly fashion to enable residents to challenge emerging conclusions and to support informed debate between members of the review team. Changes to policies, procedures and systems that are then fed back to residents to show how their input has made a difference. Monitoring and scrutiny roles. This function is carried out in many different ways in different landlords. Governing bodies, boards of housing associations and ALMOs and cabinet structures in local authority bodies, scrutinise the way their staff implement policies. Subcommittees scrutinise particular aspects of services. Various groups might scrutinise information and data about service performance. External and internal auditors independently scrutinise particular activities, most notably the landlord's accounts. Resident panels can be involved in many of these existing activities. Now back to the Tenant Involvement and Empowerment Standard. This requires the production of an annual report to residents in a form agreed with those residents. The new Tenant Satisfaction Measures Standard requires landlords to publish data regarding 22 different indicators. These publications will represent particular activities that can enable residence panels to be involved in scrutiny and monitoring tasks. Effective resident scrutiny is driven by a range of things: being independent from the landlord's own governance structure, and accountability, openness and transparency in how the panel actually operates, a clear understanding of responsibilities agreed from the beginning, a capacity to deliver what's expected from and to the panel, decisions made freely and based on access to a range of information from different Commission resources, an ability to shape the parameters of the information that the landlord collects, an embedding of the resident scrutiny into formal performance, operation and assessment frameworks, being appropriately integrated with the strategic and performance management frameworks of the landlord at the appropriate times, an effective approach to deciding what areas are scrutinised and what evidence will inform decisions, establishing an appropriate recruitment process for panel membership and systems for managing any members' conflicts of interest, then agreeing the various formats of scrutiny reports and processes for conveying recommendations back to the landlord's governing body. Finally, dealing with complaints. This function could be undertaken in a variety of ways depending on the complaints procedure adopted within each landlord, but they could include assisting residents to submit complaints, having a formal role to consider the subject matter of a complaint at particular stages of a complaints procedure, or being part of a complaints panel to make decisions on how a complaint should be determined. How residence panels may undertake any of this work or these options will require consideration of some following key matters. Making decisions. How should panels make decisions? By consensus, by majority or supermajority? Should these be in open meetings, by online polling, or some other process? Shaping services. In what way can residents shape the service they receive from their landlord, and what services might they wish to shape? And what's appropriate for the residents to shape? After all, a service like annual gas safety testing is a legal responsibility for the landlord. Overseeing performance. How do residents oversee performance and at what level? By property, by streets, neighbourhood, area? Monitoring and scrutiny. Does your landlord have a formal scrutiny panel? If so, how are decisions made about what's scrutinised? What does that scrutiny work involve? How are the outcomes of scrutiny fed through to senior managers and the governing body, and to residents in general? Recruitment. How are residents chosen to be on a panel? By election, by delegation, by selection? Representation. Are panels created that can ensure fair and equal representation of the landlord's resident constituency? And how are issues in quality and diversity addressed anyway? Resourcing. What staff and financial resources is a landlord putting into its residents' involvement structures? Assessing impact. How can panels and the wider body of residents know if any of this work is making a positive impact? And besides residents' panels being formed or operational within solely one particular landlord, a further option some residents and landlords have explored is whether there can be a benefit from residents' representatives coming together from different landlords across a local authority or wider area. Such forms of collaborative residents panels might then enable residents to compare, contrast and benchmark local services, policies and systems across different landlords, develop peer pressure in an area to ensure all landlords improve their performance to the level of the best performer, develop a greater sense of local identity and residents' confidence, community pride, self-help and independence, and enable residents to have a stronger local voice with their local council and other local service providers. Also undertake reciprocal practical activities such as resident and staff training, service inspections, production of newsletters, etc. Time for the first exercise for you. What could your local resident panel be doing? Now, this is an exercise to be thinking about what opportunities may have been provided or established by your landlord at your local level. Pause the video, Just take some time to think about whether or not your landlord provides practical opportunities for a panel to have such roles. Just think about whether you or others known to you are involved in any of such options in practice, and how effective the nature of your landlord's present opportunities to your residents may be. Then write down your summary on a page for you to look back on, and you can use that for an evaluation of your session at the end. So part 3 of the session, support for residents panels. Who should be on a residents panel? And how should a panel shape the way it operates? And what support should their landlords be giving to them? When giving attention to the core subject of establishing more resident involvement structures, consider who should be involved and how and why. It's crucial to avoid landlords choosing 10 friendly residents to rubber stamp their own things, as it is for residents to choose 10 hostile residents who may merely shout at their landlord's representatives in meetings. So representation or participation. Should residents see themselves as representatives of the resident population, their residents' association or street or property, or simply as participants in the landlord structures? A leader or a voice. It's important those involved in panels see themselves as a voice for residents, not as an agitator or leader of a campaign against the landlord. The most positive outcomes come from partnership, not confrontation. Enthusiasm and understanding. It's critical that residents have a clear understanding of what the landlord does and what it has to do. Residents can only adequately scrutinise something when they know its place in the wider context. Development, independence and challenge. Panels need to be independent of landlord governance in order to present an effective challenge. Quite legitimate to ask the question, should resident board members of housing associations or local authority councillors be themselves involved in residents panels? Can they independently scrutinise themselves? How should panels be made open and accessible to all, and also operate in a fair and effective manner? Highlight the need for creating structures and forms that can engage with a broad residents population and not just the few who come to panel meetings. Ensure an equality and diversity in such involvement comes from a variety of approaches and not from just a single one. Highlight the need for effective controls and order to a panel's business to ensure well-managed and productive meetings. And as already noted, consider a code of conduct that will address both online and in-person communications taking place. What should the landlord do to create and support effective panels? Certainly support a panel's independence from the landlord's own governance structure. Landlords need to understand effective scrutiny, which enables residents to shape services, is not about creating simple rubber stamping procedures of the status quo or other toothless structures. In deciding what will be monitored and how, that the landlord's officers enable panels to determine such choices. In compiling data to be reviewed, that support is clear for setting a programme of specific service reviews through the year and ensuring that officers collect data in a timely manner and attend panel meetings to take questions in person. In thinking how data will be presented, making sure officer presentations are engaging and factual, rather than important matters being lost in a flurry of PowerPoint slides and data tables. In helping residents to gather evidence, by making resources available to enable residents to gather their own data in the field, and which can also supplement their own first-hand experiences. In seeing scrutiny and accountability for service shaping as an appropriate function for junior officers, tenant participation staff, and service leads and senior managers alike. In keeping budget resources available so that even when facing financial challenges, landlords do not see an easy and automatic budget cut being to reduce resources for involving and empowering residents. In supporting panel outcomes to be relayed to the landlord governing body, both by reports that officers may write and present, but also by resident attendance at the governing body's meetings. By enabling residents to see practical examples of how their priorities and opinions are translated into action and improvements. The kinds of resources that will be key for supporting effective panels will be governance documentation for the panel, information about how to access landlord governance structures and service reviews, provision of key information, annual reports and data to complete tenant satisfaction measures, financial data and information about value for money performance, key strategic documents, recruitment and induction procedures, procedures for enabling a representative membership that's diverse and inclusive, procedures for building resident confidence and awareness, procedures for managing any resident remuneration, procedures for dealing with conflicts of interest, such as where panel members may work for a main contractor that the landlord uses for repairs, and other procedures for impact assessments and reviews of panel effectiveness. Okay, so time for the second exercise. How should resident panels be resourced? Take 10 minutes to consider whether you know what resources your landlord puts into local residence panels. You could think of money, or staff, or time, or venues, or other feedback. And what resources you think should be devoted to making sure the views of you and other residents are properly heard. As before, write down your summary on a page for you to look back on and use for your own evaluation of the session at the end. And again, you might wish to take a photo of the page for your own future reference. So part 4 of the session, the final part, assessing impact. How do we know whether resident panels are improving services? This last part of the session is to consider the importance of looking at assessing or evaluating what impact the work of resident panels might be able to have at the local level. Looking again at the data provided to panels for them to question how effective has it been in enabling the resident oversight and scrutiny to operate and to identify positive changes in the landlord's performance. So undertaking an impact assessment fundamentally involves checking the amount of resources going in against outcomes coming out. If something isn't making a difference for residents, especially if it's resource intensive, then there may not be much point in continuing to do it, and it just may need to be changed. So one way of doing this could be to view a residence panel's activities as a description of separate categories, and then to identify why each of those activities is being done, to consider the extent of resources going into the activity, and consider the resulting outcomes coming out of the activity. So the resources going in will be a mix of the time used by residents and the staff used on that activity, the amount of volunteer time used on the activity, the amount of money used on the activity, and any other external consultancy or other expenditure used, and any other resources that have gone into that activity. Then gather data or evidence that may inform considerations of outcomes from the activities, and this could include data-related evidence such as changes to satisfaction statistics, reports from tenants, staff, or others about how something's improved, value for money information about how activities have enabled resources to be used effectively, and information that shows that particular groups of residents have benefited from the activity, and any other evidence. The panel members and the landlord should then draw overall conclusions from the impact assessment exercise, critically discussing any activities with low outcome ratings where a high degree of resources might have gone into them. The final report can then be used to drive changes to the way the panel itself operates in the future. Key questions on the respective effectiveness panels could set for themselves will be: are we holding the landlord to account in how it performs its duties? Or is this merely a rubber stamp for wider business as usual? Are the arrangements for the panel's engagements leading to improved services and or wider well-being? Are all our residents able to participate? What are the costs and benefits of the resident involvement? Is it value for money activity? And if not, how should it be changed to still improve value? Is there evidence of a better local deal for residents? Has satisfaction demonstrably increased? Are the tenant satisfaction measures improving? And what about complaints? Are there more or less? And are the same types of complaint still coming up? So thank you. I hope this provides you with plenty to consider for your own ideas of how your landlord could support residents and local residents panels into the future. There are also lots of other things you can do to get involved with the 4 Million Homes programme. Please keep visiting our website, www.4millionhomes.org. We will be updating our guidance information regularly and advertising future events. So please tell your friends to sign up to our mailing list here so they can join in too. Follow and like us on social media to get real-time updates on the programme, and share and tag your friends in along. Encourage your landlord to sign up to our supporters kits to promote the campaign and its ideals. See the website for details on all of these. This is a great opportunity to be an agent of change for the social housing sector. We do really hope you want to be part of this journey. Thank you again.